16 yards.
16, I think I can make that one.
See what else we got.
Low? Felt low.
Yeah, about 2 inches low from the middle.
Don't say it that loud on camera. Say like...
No, right in the middle. Right in the middle. That was a good shot.
So I want to welcome you to Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. This is one of the 2 times during the whole year that are dead for me. Usually it's dead from about the month of February, before we start getting into the planting season and the really serious shed hunting. That's a dead time, and then I have another dead time, surprisingly, from about the second week of August until about the second week of September. You got all the work done on the farm, and still a little bit early for running trail cameras. It's a great time to shoot the bow and get ready, that type of preparation. But the in the field stuff now kind of takes a back seat. But I want to talk about what I'm going to be doing here pretty soon. Once this breaks loose in about 2 weeks or so, I'm going to be going full speed in trying to find and pattern a buck to hunt this year. And Ethan was with me when I killed that buck last year. So we're going to use that one as an example of how this process works, at least how it works for me, how I do it. And I had a really good idea where that deer was living. And we're going to go through that whole process of putting the plan together that actually ended up resulting in killing that buck on Halloween. So we're going to move from location to location. I think we'll do the trail camera locations first, and we'll finish up with where we killed the deer. Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails is brought to you by Redneck Blinds, Code of Silence Apparel, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail, Fuse Accessories, Elevate Tree Stands, B3 Releases and Broadheads, and Hoyt. I'm going to be talking about how every buck is different, and that's kind of the theme that I'm going to play on here. We're going to build it against the backdrop of patterning this buck, but really what it's going to come down to is there is no standard way to do this. Every deer is a little bit different. So the way that this deer behaved might be completely different from the one that we find this year. So it's just more of a process, like understanding the process. And then once you get the process, then you can understand the deer. And once you understand the deer, then you can figure out a way to kill him. This is the spot where I had my camera. We call this the open gate. And I'm trying to think, it would have been probably early September, maybe like the 5th through the 10th, somewhere in there. I put a camera here, and that buck was showing up anywhere from like late, like midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. Every time he came into this camera, the first picture I would get, he was coming from the right. So I'm looking to the more or less south here. So he was coming from the west. So I knew that he wasn't living right here, or he'd have been in there a lot earlier in the day. So he had to have been traveling to get there. He had to have been coming from someplace else. Because the closer you get to their core area, the more daylight type of pictures, the more daylight active they are. So if you're getting nighttime pictures, then you just aren't right where that deer lives. So I knew I was on the fringe. So that was a starting point. It was the first place I was getting pictures. I thought, okay, this is a solid buck. This is the one that I want to shoot. But I know he's not living here. He's living someplace to the west. So I've got to figure out where that is. So let's keep moving. Trying to figure out where to put the cameras to learn as much as you can. Maybe that's more of an art than it is a science. I like to be in not necessarily fringe areas, but spots that I can get to with a four-wheeler or a truck or a tractor, but spots that are close enough to the action that you're going to learn something. You're like, I don't want to be down there by the buildings. You're not going to learn anything. So you need to be in as many places as you can be, as close to where you think a deer might live as possible without being intrusive. And so that's the trick, is like, we could check this camera. I could check this camera every 3 days. you know, no problem. Drive up through here with the four-wheeler. We do it all the time. Come through with the tractor. It's not a big deal as far as, you know, educating deer or spooking deer. So those are the kind of spots that I like, and I'll pick as many of those as I can find. I don't want to be more than a couple hundred yards apart at the most, because there's a lot that can slip through the cracks. You know, we're talking about every buck being different. There have been deer that I've hunted that live on 30 acres or less. You know, and if you think about 30 acres, you know, a square mile is 640. So that's 1/20th of a square mile, basically, right? Mm-hmm. Is my math right?
That's a lot of numbers for me.
You're the one in college, not me.
Yeah.
So it's 1/20th. Well, I'm just going to trust my numbers here. Roughly 1/20th of a square mile. So it'd be pretty easy for that deer to slip through the net if you didn't have pretty good saturation with your trail cameras. So I think taking the aerial photo, you know, like we got the Hunt Stand app, we pull that up, we can look at it, we can see, you know, if I got a camera here, 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 etc., where do I have spots where a deer could be living and me not get pictures of it. So you want to try to address every part of the property, but you want to do it in a way where you're not changing the behavior of the deer that live there in the process of checking the cameras. Okay, Ethan, this is where I think he was living, out on this point. So let's walk down there. We've come about, how far have we come from the open gate? Quarter of a mile?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he was coming from here, and that's why it was taking him so long to get there, you know, to that other camera in the evenings. Mm-hmm. So let's walk down there and look at this bedding point, and eventually, once we see this whole process of how this aligns with where we ended up killing him, you'll see why this makes a lot of sense. Yep. So there were cows in here last year, and you know, we didn't really get a chance to run camera over here. Mm-hmm. Or I would have liked to have had one, you know, right where this point, you know, this bedding point comes out onto the field above us. So if you look around, you can see the tractor back there. Then there's the cornfield behind. We're facing out to where the deer bed. You know, so if we keep going out, we're going out onto that point. It would have been nice to have a camera up there. Mm-hmm. That would have told me a lot more. But there were cows in here, and I wasn't going to run a camera in there and have the cows, you know, mashing into it all the time. So
I know all about that.
Yeah. As bedding areas go, this one's pretty open. The fringe around it, you know, is probably where the deer bed, you know, around the edge. But there's a pretty nice trail on here right now. And, you know, with a little bit of timber stand improvement work here, there's just a lot of walnut, which is good and bad. I mean, it's good because you got, you know, quality timber, but it's bad because you can't cut a bunch of stuff down, you know, to make it thicker. But I think he was living out here.
Do you think it's the case more times than not that the deer are living on the edge rather than on top of the ridge? Yeah,
I think they bed where they can see down over the edge.
And that's just for strictly visual, or is that for wind advantage, or?
Probably both. Yep. Yeah, because normally when you study these bedding areas very much, you'll see that the beds are usually on the downwind side. The most recent ones, like you check, well, where was the wind in the last couple of days? These are fresh beds. So they like to bed where the wind is blowing, you know, across the top of the ridge, and it hits their back. And then they're looking downwind.
Yep.
And they can smell everything that's behind them.
So like the same concept for Western hunting. I mean, like those big mule deer bucks or elk or whatever.
Yeah.
Same concept.
They're really good at knowing, you know, how to protect their bedding areas. Mm-hmm. You know, once they bed, though, at least with whitetails I've seen, they become very mellow, very laid back. It's almost like they think they're totally safe. Maybe it's the only place they let their guard down is once they've bedded. So that gives you some opportunities. Sometimes you can take advantage of that, which I've done in the past. But they're pretty careful about where they bed for that reason. I mean, there are some August beds up in here too. That's a big old bed right there. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's got to be a buck. Big old, you know, loner. There aren't a lot of beds around. Usually the does bed with the family groups. Yep. And the bucks bed by themselves. Kneel down next to that so people can see how big that is.
5 feet long, probably.
Yeah. So keeping with the theme, the whole concept is every buck is different, you know, and some of them have big ranges, some of them have small ranges. Some of them roam, you know, like during the day. Some of them, you know, are very much focused on nighttime movement. So all you can do is learn as much as you can about the individual buck that you're hunting and learn the personality and the traits of that deer, and then you form your strategy after that. That's why sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years to kill some of these bucks, you know, because it takes that long to really figure out, you know, where their weaknesses are, you know, to really get them pegged. So it's fun to have the opportunity to do that. Obviously, you know, if you're hunting public land or some places where you have permission, where there's lots of competition, you don't have that opportunity. But that's the cool thing about this farm, is we do have that opportunity. Okay, so this is our second to last stop. Our next stop is, well, yes, this is our second to last stop. Our last stop is going to be where we killed the deer. This is where I would bet you 90% odds where that deer spent most of his time, was right here. And again, it's because of what we learned from the cameras. The one down at the bottom in the cornfield, he would approach that in daylight and he would come from this direction. The one that was over on the other side, he was not coming to that until late. So that was in the opposite direction, a ways away from, you know, his core. And then the one further out on that point, you know, where the trail makes a tight turn, he wasn't hitting that one at all. And that's only a couple 100 yards away from the open gate.
So he's fringing away from that.
Yeah, he wasn't living over there at all. So this was his area. This was his core right here. And the cameras, I guess if we just put any more cameras that direction, we would have definitely verified that. But we had enough, you know, information to know that he was very high likelihood of living here, and the best place to kill him would be down in that bottom. And that's why, you know, it was not a simple thing, but it was not a surprising thing when we killed him out of that scrape tree. This is another spot right out on this point where I had an early camera. And this made sense again because it was easy to get to. It's right on the main trail, you know, going through the farm. And the deer weren't going to be like too put off if I drove through here and checked it. Well, not only is it, you know, easy to get to without bumping deer, but it's real thick out on that end. And there's a lot of deer that bed out there. So it made sense to me that this would be another one of our key spots, you know, for having a camera. And as it turned out, that buck that I killed, that we killed that night, he never showed up on this camera. And it's, I'll bet you it's not much more than 200 yards from that open gate. You know, and he was showing up there during the middle of the night. He never showed up here. So that told me that he wasn't coming from this direction, right? He wasn't bedding out on this point. And he probably wasn't bedding to the east, because he likely would have hit this spot on his way over. So again, that led me to believe that he was bedding to the west. You know, and that was eventually where, you know, we ended up pegging him. So it's just one more data point that led to putting that whole picture together on that buck. And but you have to have those cameras in those locations, you know, that make sense, you know, where you can learn something without being too intrusive, you know, into the, you know, where the deer are bedded. Okay, so we've covered a couple spots here. We got a couple more to go. Then we'll put this whole story together.
Down the hill.
Yep. This is one of the other spots then where we had cameras. There were cameras on some of these other ridges too that buck never showed up on, but this was the final piece of the puzzle, I guess, was down in this valley. So I started with one camera here. We'll keep going to the edge of the field. It's gonna be really tough. Well, we're not gonna. Yeah, the corn looks good. We're not gonna go to where I had the cameras because it was beans last year, and you could go right to those spots. But you know, I'll whirl around and you can see behind me. So the camera was in this little field behind me, not very far in, and that was my starting point down here. And I picked up a few pictures of him like after dark pictures. And I thought, I wonder where he's coming into this field. You know, because if you have one camera on that field, whatever direction he comes from, he could circle all over the place and come there. Well, I thought, well, I'm going to put another camera on the other end. So I had one camera on each end of this field then. So that way I could tell where he was coming in at.
Yep.
Because some nights you'd pick him up on one camera, not the other one, and vice versa. And this one was the one that he was getting to the latest. The one that was all the way up on the other end of this field was the one that he was hitting earlier. And sometimes you could see him, like if another deer triggered the shot, you could see him in the background, like coming down into the field, which was pretty cool. You know, like you could see him in daylight approaching this food plot from that bluff off to the right. So again, all of the data points circled around and suggested that he was bedded, you know, up on that point. That's in this valley. It's half the way up and on the right side up in there. And that's where, you know, as it turned out, well, put it this way then, we had enough information now to say, I know where we can kill this deer. And he's got a small range. He's a killable deer. He's got some daylight activity, not tons, but as we get closer to the rut, he's gonna have more and more. They all do. You know, you've got your 3 green flags. You know, you've got the green flag that says, hey, I've got a buck on a daylight pattern, hunt him. You've got a cold front approaching. You know, then you've got deer that are not quite on daylight, but they're going to be, you know, more likely to move during daylight on a cold front, hunt. And then your third green is what the rut approaching. So that was the one where we finally got him. I mean, it was Halloween.
I think we capitalized on the 3rd green flag too, because I remember walking up here, we were wearing t-shirts, you know, and almost sweating.
Well, let's go to that spot. I mean, we can walk right to the spot where that deer fell. And we called this location the scrape tree because there's a tree up in this valley that had 4 or 5 scrapes under it, and that was the one where we were sitting. Well, that's just on the upper end of this row of trees. You know, we're talking about where that buck lived, and the night that we killed him, that's probably, well, he came, I think, from the left side, but he was basically hanging underneath that ridge. So maybe he had a little bit bigger core than what we thought, you know, because we didn't run camera at all on the left. But he didn't have a big area because I had more cameras up on top and he never showed up on any of those. So I would say he was another one of those bucks that had a 30 to 40 acre, you know, range.
That's crazy.
Very small, very killable deer when they live in that condensed of an area. If they've got any daylight movement built into their personalities at all, they're very killable. So,
do you think that the deer's range has to do with, like, you know, his behavior, like if he's a dominant buck or not, or maybe there's another dominant buck that we didn't know about living on the next ridge over, and that's why he never fringed over there? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's just their, we don't call it a personality, but their traits. For example, like some people are homebodies. Some people like to travel. You know, I'm not saying that deer are like people, but they're different in the same way that people are different. You know, some deer are more prone to move during daylight, you know, than others.
I got you.
So some of it's just baked into them, but also as they get older, their ranges tend to compress too. That's just a general trend that you see. But otherwise, you're just dealing with individuals with individual traits, and that's what makes it so fascinating. And that's why it's so much fun to pick one out, even if he's not a monster, to pick that one deer out and try to learn enough about him to kill him, because then it becomes more of a personal quest. You know, it's not about just killing a deer and putting him on the wall. Then it becomes about the process or the quest. And that's way funner, in my opinion, than just tagging a nice buck and putting him on the wall. Okay, so now we're at the spot where that deer fell. If you look behind us, you can see this little grove of trees, and the scrape tree is at the upper end of that grove of trees, and that was where we were sitting. So this will be another, I mean, this will be a great spot again. I don't know if we'll have a shooter buck, you know, living on the ridges around, you know, but we got some really nice corn down in here. One of the weaknesses we felt on this spot was the deer could see us when we were coming up in there, you know, and now with the corn, even if all the foliage falls off the trees and the brush on these ridges, we can still sneak through the corn to get in there.
Yep.
But so this is where it culminated. This is where he fell. Arrow hit him right there. He ran a little way, circled around, and fell down right here. So it was a really cool hunt. And it's a really, I suppose, good representation of the process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the one that we hunt this year might be completely different. You know, he may have a totally different set of traits, a different personality. You know, you've got to go through the process. You've got to learn all that stuff that gives you pull as much information as you can from every piece of resource that you've got available to you. And you learn as much as you can about that deer. And you hunt that deer individually because every buck is different. So that's how we're going to do it. And we're going to start here in about 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, not very long.
No, and then it'll be full go from then on. Well, we appreciate you joining us. We'll see you right back here again in another week. Now we're going to start cranking these things out for the next episode of Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. And remember to always
dream big.
That's right, we're dreaming big.
That's right.